Flint Murkison Jr., organized the Cowboys because of an unfulfilled childhood dream or as a business venture?
I think it started as a dream, I think, and he was it was interesting. He was somebody that was very thoughtful and would set goals for himself, and he was doing that, from adolescence on, kind of. And there were others, and one of them was to go to MIT coming out of high school, because he wanted, and that ties in another question, but he was really into challenging himself, and he was highly confident, really bright guy, and so MIT was an example. The Marines was another one. When he went to volunteer, he made sure to select the Marines because of their reputation and whatnot, and the Cowboys were just. Was another example of that, where he was just infatuated with football. He played very little. He was a real small, kind of puny guy, but he played intramural football in high school and tackle football, and apparently it's pretty good. But and then I think it was that love for football and for his community, his hometown Dallas, that kind of came together, and he pursued for. I guess about 10 years, buying, starting a franchise in Dallas.
Hey, thanks to everybody for coming out here tonight. We're so excited about this event. We've done a lot of work to prepare for it, and it's really great to see you here. We're very excited about it. However, we are even more excited about something happening tomorrow. It's the opening of the annual State Fair of Texas. And it's kind of a Granbury Murkison family tradition. We will be going out there later tonight with our tents, and we will be setting them up outside the entrance. And our two families will be sleeping together in the same large tent. Although I thought last year, frankly, the tent you brought wasn't quite big enough.
I'm getting my TP repaired,
that's
so
right,
I don't know if I could make it or not.
That's right. And but there's a reason we're excited about it. You may have heard a while back that the current mayor of Dallas, whose name is Eric Johnson, you're going to hear about another mayor named Eric Johnson more tonight. But the current mayor, a while back, was talking about moving another NFL team to the Cotton Bowl in Fair Park, where other teams used to play. And I told Burke at the time, Burke, and the mayor mentioned the Chargers, who play in LA as tenants in a high-priced apartment building, that he wanted them to come to the Cotton Bowl. And I told Burke, I said, I think the Murkison family should buy the Chargers, move them to Dallas, not Arlington, and play in the Cotton Bowl in Fair Park. Now, if you think Burke should do that, would you applaud, please? There you go. I think they like it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And by the way, if they move to Dallas, there's one team in the area that will win the Super Bowl, and it's not the one that lives in Arlington. Right? There you go.
Oh, you got that one.
We're ready to start our PowerPoint.
Okay.
I'm so excited about this.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, there's our first one. We like to start out with this trivia question. There are three, not one, not two, but three current NFL teams who once played in the Cotton Bowl in Fair Park. Can anybody here name all three? This gentleman here. There you go. He got it. 1952. That's right. Good for you.
Good going.
By the way, one of the things we wanted to do tonight, since we're both fans of libraries, is we wanted to mention books that go along with our presentation. I also wanted to let you know that my wife, a best-selling children's book author who's written more than 20 best-selling books, is sitting right there. Her name is Nancy Chernin. And several of her books are in the Allen Public Library. And by the way, I looked this up today. There are two new books out. One is new, the other is a couple of years old, but there are two books out right now about the 1952 Dallas Texans, who now are the Indianapolis Colts. One is called A Big Mess in Texas by David Fleming. The other is Wards of the League by Connell and Giles Miller. But we also touch on that experience in our book, Hole in the Roof.
That's
and
true.
Hey, Burke, why don't you, before we leave this slide, your dad wanted to buy, that was his first attempt to buy a pro football team. Why don't you tell them about that?
Yeah, he had moved back to Dallas in like the mid 40s after the World War II. He had been a Marine, and so he had started his family in Dallas, and for some reason he was like a real goal setter and was always set goals for himself. And one of them, he just loved football. He was a small, kind of puny guy, but he just loved football, and he thought that, and he was really intrigued by professional football. And I remember seeing it on black and white grainy TV at home, pre 1960 in the 50s. I was born in 49, but anyway, this thing was about, he really wanted to bring professional football to Dallas. He loved Dallas. He loved professional football. He saw the future of it. He was a very bright, visionary person. And he just saw that there was, a need to have one in Dallas, and he went about. And when the Texans started up in '52, he actually had a couple of friends. They raised money from some of his friends, and he bought, I think, 24 season tickets, and was trying to help the cause and whatnot. Of course, they imploded before the season was even over. It was kind of sad. They were undercapitalized, and down there at Fair Park, and nobody showed up, and they were immediately scrambling for capital and stuff. And finally, the league took them over about a little over halfway through the season, and Dad immediately jumped in the gear and was trying to make an offer to buy him and keep him in Dallas. But Bert Bell, who was the commissioner at the time in the NFL, was friends with Carroll Rosenblum, who was, and so he sold the franchise and the assets and whatnot to Carroll Rosenblum, who moved them up to Baltimore, Maryland, and they became the Baltimore Colts. And it's kind of interesting because they, within 6 years, they won the world championship with a lot of the players that were on that team that had been fielded in the Texans in Dallas.
Okay, so we're gonna, by the way, this one book that just came out, A Big Mess in Texas by David Fleming, about that team, great reviews that I've read so far, if you're interested. Okay, this was a game played in a real NFL game, regular season game played in October of 2009. The Cowboys won in overtime, imagine that. And they wore their old throwback uniforms that they both wore in the Cotton Bowl. The game was played in Kansas City, but the Kansas City Chiefs wore the Dallas Texans helmets that day, and the Cowboys won their throwback uniform. Burke, I don't know if you did this. I don't know if you went to Texans games, but my dad and I, we went to the games of both teams from 60 through 62 when the Texans, they finished their third season by winning the AFL championship and then announcing that they were leaving Dallas. What did their decision to leave Dallas, what did that do for the Cowboys?
Oh, it really jump-started the franchise because they were they both started up in 1960, and so you had two teams playing in the same stadium, the Cotton Bowl, competing week to week. They'd alternate weeks, and it was just a bloodbath financially. I mean, the Texans kind of their experience kind of demonstrated the fact that Dallas, it was really questionable would Dallas would even support one team, much less two, and so. They entered this competition, and Dad was always just a very tough kind of competitor, and there was no way he was going to back down and ever consider like moving the Cowboys or anything. So anytime the question came up is would he ever consider it, his basic comment was, as long as the Dallas Texans are in Dallas, there are going to be two teams in Dallas. And so he never blinked. And this went on for 3 full seasons. And it was miserable for both teams and both owners. They were just, losing money left and right. And then finally, I think Lamar just kind of saw the light. He was more. Dad was not a real pragmatic kind of person. He was, was very competitive, and kind of visionary, and thought in different terms than people, and risk. Really, he didn't think about risk, which in many cases was unfortunate for him. But in this case, he was able to outlast the Texans, and they moved. And when they did, that just opened the door for the Cowboys. I think Dad at the time realized that the team was going to make it, and it was at that juncture that his next dream, or his next goal beyond the Cowboys, was to build a new stadium for the team to play in. And so he immediately felt the confidence to go about starting that process of developing a new stadium.
Yeah, both those teams were very different. The Cowboys, of course, were not a good team when they started out. They had losing seasons in 60, 61, 62, 63, 64. They finished at 565, and then they had their first winning season in 1966, and that turned out to be the first of 20 consecutive winning seasons, most of those under Clint Jr. But the Texans from 60 through 62 were a very fun team. The old AFL teams played a lot of offense, great offense, not a lot of defense. And of course the Texans won. They won the championship their third year in Dallas. And but if you went to a Cowboy game, though, you could really see the greats of the NFL. They might not win, but you could see Jim Brown, the incredible Jim Brown, Y.A. Tittle, Big Daddy Lipscomb. I mean, you could see the true greats of professional football when you went to the Cowboy games. By the way, this particular slide reminds me of a friend of ours, John Eisenberg, who grew up in Dallas. He wrote a great book about this rivalry called 10-Gallon War. I assume that it's in the Allen Library. I don't know for sure. Tom told me that John Eisenberg has spoken here before. And I read a while back that he sold the movie rights to this story. So there may soon be a movie about the Texans and the Cowboys in their early years in the Cotton Bowl. Burke and I were both asked to star in it, but the money wasn't good enough. Okay, here we go. Oh, here we go. Dandy Don Meredith, a woeful beginning. And really, it was a rough few years. It would have been great if the Cowboys could have played the Kansas City Chiefs in the first Super Bowl. That would have been a live reenactment of the 10-Gallon War. But unfortunately, they lost in the game that was played on January 1st of 67 against the Green Bay Packers. They lost painfully. So to the Green Bay Packers, at the end of the 66 and 67 seasons. But I'm one of those, my parents grew up close to where Don Meredith did in East Texas, so we loved Dandy Don, and in my opinion, he tried his best to get us there. Let's see.
I think he was, I'd say he was charismatic, and the players loved him. On the one hand, he was funny, charismatic, and, the fans loved him, the players, and he was just a unique individual. But, when you look at it, I think his relationship with Landry just kind of failed, because I think Landry, he was obviously all business, and I think Landry viewed him as kind of destructive to the unity of the team. He would undermine. I think Landry was all about structure and discipline, and I know they'd have team meetings and stuff, and Meredith and a friend, a buddy or something, would be back in the back, giggling, making jokes, and I think that really took a toll on Landry and his respect for Meredith. But just incredible quarterback at the same time. It's so sad that he retired when he did, because not only we would have seen him at Texas Stadium, but I think he would have been, one of the premier quarterbacks of all time.
In 1982, I spent the better part of a day with Don Meredith at his home. He then lived in Beverly Hills. He was a staple on Monday Night Football by then, and I had a particular premise that I wanted to interview him about involving the Cowboys in the assassination and so forth. However, we then wandered into relationships, and he didn't have anything critical to say about Coach Landry. But to add to Burke's point, I interviewed Landry too. After I did the long interview with Don, I interviewed Landry, and he was surprisingly candid with me. It really surprised me. This is the article. I found it recently when I was cleaning out the garage. I didn't know it's from a long ago defunct magazine. But I asked Landry about, Don's happy-go-lucky personality, and, if that sometimes led to less than success on the football field. And Tom said, Don brought a lot of that on himself. Don, and this is just the way he is, liked to have fun. He enjoyed football. He enjoyed life. Everything was a ball for Don. And that's what caused him to have those rough days. It was unfortunate, but that's how it was. In other words, it wasn't really a ringing endorsement, whereas Bob Lilly, Pete Gent, a lot of the guys he played with, they have all told me that he was the single greatest leader they ever played with on a football team, that he was an incredible leader. And they didn't, even though Gent had his own problems with Meredith, which you will see in the movie North Dallas 40 and the novel that Pete wrote that preceded it, he had his own issues with Meredith, but he felt that on the football field, he was an incredible leader. And one thing Landry did agree to, I'm glad he did, is that this man played through extraordinary pain. I mean, it was unbelievable, the beating he took. He was with those horrible teams from 60, the first 6 years were losing seasons, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64. Then they finished 565. But they were, he just got beat up. And I think also one thing that was hurtful to him is very often Landry would not, was not afraid to pull him from a game, like sometimes at halftime, sometimes later, sometimes before, and put in Craig Morton in particular. And Don told me the day that, that I interviewed him that he was very hurt by that. But he was hurt even more by the fact that very often the Cotton Bowl crowd, it sounded like everybody would be booing him. They were rough on him. And I think he went through a lot for the franchise. And I'm sorry, but one thing that I really agree with Don about, and it really was reflected in his great broadcasting career, in the end, it's football. It's a game. It's a kid's game, right? That these grown men play and are risking their health and their lives for. And he saw it as a game, and he liked to have fun. He liked to have fun with the game. And that was part of his ability to lead a team. He didn't take it as seriously as a lot of these other people do, right? Like other former players who were on TV, whom I won't mention, who take it so seriously. And I mean, I found that very refreshing. But I think one thing I learned from doing this story is that he and Tom Landry were not the best pairing, that you could have had, right, in terms of a quarterback and a coach.
Okay, this is a cheery subject. We're going to talk about the Kennedy assassination and the impact. This had an enormous impact on the history of the Cowboys and obviously on the history of Dallas and the history of the nation. And, actually one of the ways in which the assassination is quite relevant to what we're going to talk about here tonight is that, by the way, this is a photograph that I own, Jim Brown and Bob Lilly, each of whom I have written stories on in the past. They signed this photo for me. But what's interesting about this photo It was taken 2 days after the Kennedy assassination. The then commissioner of the NFL, Pete Rozelle, stupidly decided not to cancel the weekend's games, none of which would be on TV anyway, because it was assassination coverage from the time it happened until Monday after the funeral. But anyway, they, as we say here, the assassination changed Dallas politically, spoiling Clint's dream of a stadium in downtown Dallas. It changed politically because the city decided to kind of appoint a new mayor, and they gave him full authority to kind of redesign not only the city architecturally, but in many other ways as well. Also, there's a lot of Cowboys hatred in the United States. Don't know if you've picked up on that. I have friends and relatives in San Francisco and Philadelphia, and I know a lot of people in Washington. Those three cities are still rife with Cowboys hatred. And, you know, I always say, why would you hate them now? They're not a threat to anybody. Why would you care, right? But I contend that it all began with the assassination. Dallas was labeled the city of hate, and conversely, the assassination is what gave many people in Dallas an excuse to cheer for the Cowboys, because we desperately needed something that would elevate the mood and the spirit of the city. Listen, I want to read something to you that I found in doing research for tonight. This is fascinating to me, and then I'm going to ask Burke to comment on this. Wick Allison, who is no longer living, founded D Magazine, and he wrote this article he wrote these words, just a couple of paragraphs, quite some time ago, but it really sums up why J. Eric Johnson, whose parents were Swedish immigrants, he was from New York City himself, how and why he became the mayor of Dallas. Here's what it says. In December 1963, barely a month after the assassination of John F. Kennedy, a delegation of civic leaders rode in a caravan from downtown Dallas up Central Expressway to the headquarters of Texas Instruments. They were on a mission. Somehow they had to convince Eric Johnson, TI's chairman and one of the most brilliant men of his time, that he needed to become the new mayor of Dallas. Their city was in trouble. Dallas had been labeled in the days after the assassination as the city of hate, and the label was sticking. Article after article, news broadcast after news broadcast blamed the political climate in Dallas for the president's murder. Dallas could survive the calumny only if a man as respected as Eric Johnson took its helm. The company Johnson led, and along with Cecil Green and Eugene McDermott, whose wife was Margaret McDermott, had founded, was among the most prestigious in America. TI had led the technological revolution. It invented sonar during World War II, infrared in the 50s, the silicon transistor, and the integrated circuit. When Fortune later launched its U.S. Business Hall of Fame, Eric Johnson was among its first inductees. In their meeting with Johnson, that day, the Dallas oligarchs, and these were the last of the fabled Dallas oligarchy, faced two obstacles. For one thing, Johnson had never shown the slightest interest in civic matters. For another, Dallas already had a mayor, Earl Cabell, who had been elected only 2 years before. The solution to the second problem was easy. They had decided before climbing in their cars that Earl Cabell would make an excellent congressman, which he became. Coincidentally, there was a congressional election in 11 months. The answer to the first problem was simply a heartfelt plea. They told Johnson his city needed him, and they meant it. They told Johnson he had no choice, and they meant that too. They were tense and fraught and sincere. He could not say no. The timing was delicate, if urgent. The Cabell problem would have to be solved. He had to arrange succession at TI. They agreed on a February date, and indeed on February 3rd, 1964, Earl Cabell resigned and announced his run for Congress. So Burke, Eric Johnson out of nowhere becomes the mayor of the city of Dallas, kind of appointed rather than elected. What impact did that have on the history of the Cowboys?
Well, Dad, first, when he, as after the Chiefs, not the Chiefs, but the Texans left town, he immediately began thinking about a new stadium. And initially, he kind of thought about thinking that real estate would not be affordable outside of the Fair Park. He focused initially on Fair Park, building another stadium in Fair Park to replace the Cotton Bowl, which he felt like was just worn out. And what was the word he used? It was just completely worn out. But anyway, and needed to be replaced. And they actually, and
He
so
called it fully depreciated.
fully depreciated, which it sure was. And I mean, it was scary kind of almost. But anyway, so his whole process of a stadium kind of grew from there, and he began to realize he was friends with or actually his family, the Murchison family, were involved in a development, high-rise development on the west side of downtown. It was the one main place, which ended up just being one tower, but the vision had been to build. It was supposed to be built kind of to mimic Rockefeller Center with multiple towers and a bridge across Main Street and all this kind of stuff, but it never got there. But at the same time, in studying that, he began to realize that there was a lot of real estate on the west end of downtown that was highly affordable and priced at a point that he felt the stadium could build. And so that he began to push that strong and went to Eric Johnson in order to do that. And Eric's whole vision was entirely different. And he was just a brilliant, really generous man, but he was a difficult man and had tendencies just to be almost dictatorial. And he earned the nickname King Eric as a result of it. And he and Dad, from the first time they met, they were just butting heads, and both were strong-willed, stubborn, and neither one was going to back down. And to top it off, Eric didn't have much respect for Dad. He felt like he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, and so he was born with a wealthy father. But anyway, there was poor communication and no respect, and it just started bad and got worse, and it kind of ruined Dad's vision to place a stadium on the west side of downtown, Central Business District. And his vision kind of grew from a stadium, but he also began to think about and advocate moving the performance hall, the music hall, Fair Park Music Hall over there, and also the museums, and kind of turn it into an arts and cultural complex. It was breathtaking in its vision and stuff. And Eric Johnson just dumped all over it. And in hindsight, when you look at things, the way Dallas has developed, it's followed along us. We haven't ended up with a stadium in Dallas, unfortunately, but in terms of the performance hall and the Meyerson and the museums with the arts district, and it kind of followed his original lead. He was way ahead of people, and but he could just never get anywhere with Eric Johnson, who was just kind of stuck in the mud on the thing.
Before we leave this topic of the assassination, I have spoken a lot to college students in the past, at SMU in particular, where I graduated. And very often they will say, well, why did they call it the City of Hate? What was that all about? Well, there were actually 3 distinct events preceding the assassination that led to Dallas being called the City of Hate. And a lot of them, all 3 of them, involved a Dallas congressman, and who was very right-wing, and he was the guy that the city fathers, after the assassination, really wanted to get rid of. And they wanted to get rid of him by having Earl Cabell, a Democrat, run for his seat. But I will tell you at this point, you just cannot compare the politics of 60 to 63 with the politics of today, not for the most part. For one, when we started doing this book, and it really appealed to me from the start because I saw it as a project in history and sociology and psychology and even politics. But I looked this up. In 1960, the month, November 1960, when John F. Kennedy ran for president, I wanted to look in particular at the 11 Confederate states, and I wanted to find out how many Democrats there were and how many Republicans there were. So in 1960, there were 11 Confederate states. They had 2 senators, like every other state. That's 22 senators. Who can tell me how many Democrats there were and how many Republicans there were among the 22? Anybody? 22-0 for the Democrats. Times have changed. That's right. That's right. So, but anyway, the first event actually occurred in November of 1960. And this is fascinating. The effort to topple this guy led the Dallas Citizens Council to want to replace him with Earl Cabell, which led to the appointment of Eric Johnson, which messed everything up for Clint. So this is the New York Times obituary on Bruce Alger. This is the first paragraph. Bruce Alger, a 5-term conservative congressman from Texas, who led elegantly dressed Republican women in a boorish protest against Lyndon B. Johnson in 1960 that backfired and may have cost Richard Nixon the state and the presidential election, died on April 13th in Palm Bay, Florida. He was 96. But the person who later said that this cost him the election was Richard Nixon. He blamed Alger for this. Nixon was leading in Texas voter surveys when Johnson, a United States Senator from Texas who was Kennedy's running mate, visited Dallas just 4 days before the election. He was promptly set upon outside the Adolphus hotels by what the newspapers called a mink coat mob of women who spat in the direction of his wife, Lady Bird, and grabbed her gloves and threw them in the gutter. And later, Nixon himself said, had that not happened, I would have carried Texas. I would have been the president. And that, of course, is why Kennedy picked LBJ as his running mate, because he felt he desperately needed those 25 electoral votes. But anyway, all of this led to the powers that be picking your guy, J. Eric Johnson, to be the mayor. And the thing about, can you go to the next slide? We want to, okay, this happened not long after the assassination, but J. Eric Johnson, many say he was the greatest mayor in Dallas history. Kind of hard to argue with that. He was responsible. His big thing was DFW Airport. He felt that would change not only the city, but the region economically. He was right about that. He wanted a new central library. He wanted a new city hall designed by a named architect. His sweeping program, Goals for Dallas, was another big thing. And people credit him with elevating the image of the city. And I guess he did that, but he did it mainly through architecture to a large extent. And I personally, as a child, felt that Mr. Murkison was right to want to put the stadium downtown, a beautiful new stadium downtown, where all of us in Dallas could come together and celebrate this team who was lifting our spirits and our emotions when we desperately needed our spirits and emotion to be elevated. But in terms of Burke's father being a true individual, in February of '64, he was surrounded by these members of the media, and we can be very rough when we need to be. And they basically were saying to him, "Why don't you get rid of this Tom Landry? I mean, he's a lousy coach. I mean, he's coached for 4 seasons. They've all been losing seasons. So what does your dad do in February of '64?
Tom came out in '63. So I guess it was 1963. They've been in their fourth season. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And Sports Illustrated, apparently they predicted that the Cowboys would win. At the time, there were 2 conferences in the NFL. There's the East and the West, and the Cowboys were in the East, and they predicted the Cowboys would win the Eastern Division, which would have been a huge step for them.
Because they had a great defense.
Yeah, great defense, and but they just fell flat, and they only won 4 games that year, and everybody they had the Texans were gone, and they were predicted to win this, and they fell flat, and everybody wanted to get rid of Landry, and Dad's immediate response was to call a press conference and announced that he was giving Tom Landry a 10-year contract, which was just, that was a big one. And it was certainly big for Tom Landry, who, when he came to Dallas, when he was recruited as a expansion team coach, he never thought that he would last more than a couple of years. He was wanting to get his family, wanting to get out of New York, get his family down to Texas, and start figuring out a way to make a living and things. And the coaching the Cowboys was a bridge to that, but he didn't ever think he was going to last. Well, but it's also interesting that in the late 50s, he would always come in the off season and spend. His wife Alicia was from Dallas, and I think they would settle down for the off season, then go back for the regular season in New York, where he was a defensive coach and a player earlier than that, and so he was down here and went to a Bible study and became born again, like first study or something. And he was and throughout his life and career, he was a big believer and worked with, numerous causes, spiritual causes and whatnot. But anyway, he saw this when Dad gave him the offering, that he thought it was like a message from the Lord. And he just, drilled down, he just dedicated himself completely to coaching and that pursuit. And it, the dividends, the Cowboys and Dad reaped the benefit of that, and, the rest is history.
Okay, Burke and I were both at this game. This was the first big moment in Dallas Cowboys history. They had this winning season in 1966, and they played the NFL championship game in the Cotton Bowl on January 1st, 1967. And the winner of this game would go to Super Bowl I, and the opponent would be the old Dallas Texans, the Kansas City Chiefs. It was a back-and-forth game, the best football game I personally have ever seen in person. But I will tell you this, it was also a very emotional game for me. I mean, I was a 6th grader growing up in Pleasant Grove when the assassination occurred. On the day of this game, I was 15 years old, and there was this emotional moment as my family and I, my dad, my mom, my little brother, our uncle, the 5 of us are going into the Cotton Bowl to watch this incredible game. And I said, look at that. And it was a CBS truck that was parked outside the stadium. The CBS truck was there to broadcast the game. And I remember saying to my dad, this is an amazing thing. That is, CBS back then, as you know, was the Tiffany Network with Walter Cronkite, and they had the NFL games, all the NFL games. And I said, they're here today to cover our football team. They're not here to cover a murder. I remember saying that as a kid. And that was exactly the case. And that gave us a feeling of enormous pride. But you also loved being at that game, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was just incredible. And I guess we're going to carry, we lost this. Everybody probably here remembers that. But anyway, we had the offsides. We were down 34-27 and got with it, down to the 2-yard line. Somehow wasn't able to convert, make that touchdown, but it was just devastating. But then they came back the following year and played again. But it's interesting. We were so close to winning that game. And the following year up in Green Bay at the Ice Bowl, we should have won that game. I mean, that was ours to win, and we didn't win. But had we won, this is to me is striking, had we won both those games, then what is known as now as the Lombardi Trophy could have been named the Landry Trophy.
Right.
It would have been spectacular.
Right. Yeah, I got to be friends a few years ago with Michael Meredith, Don Meredith's son, and he had a great line once. He said, we were Landry and my dad, we're this far away from a championship 2 years in a row. It was like a foot away from being the Landry Trophy instead of the Lombardi Trophy. Can you go to the next slide? Okay, I know you're thrilled. We're going to talk some more about Eric Johnson. Anyway, and yeah, we call him King Eric. I know he's got people in Dallas who would be offended by that, I suppose. But I personally, you know what, I'm a lifelong journalist. I had 54 years of bylines before I took a buyout from the Dallas Morning News. And I worked for several newspapers, including the Washington Post and the Los Angeles Times. But the one thing that I sort of learned in my career was to be very suspicious of autocrats, and the sports world has had its own share of autocrats. And I'm sorry, as great as he was for Dallas, I believe that Eric Johnson was kind of tone deaf about a new home for the Cowboys. I think it would have been a cool thing that they did it in downtown Dallas, and but he just didn't want it.
Can I add something? 'Cause
Yes.
In this photograph, this is after he retired from business and whatnot, and he had a office up in the old Republic Bank Tower. I guess it's still around, but he was up, and you can see he's got a view here, kind of the west, southwest, and then off northwest. If you could have been there, you could have seen Texas Stadium. So over here, you could see the kind of the area with the convention center that Dad was thinking about placing the stadium, and the museum complex and whatnot. And somebody asked Eric at one point, did he ever feel like he made any mistakes or something like that? And his response was, look, I can just get up my suite and look down, and I can see some of my mistakes right there. And so I think he realized in hindsight that he made a big boo-boo when it came to shutting the stadium down in the western end of the downtown.
Okay, I told you the other day I was going to ask you this. So this is a journalist question. Okay, I'm going to put you on the hot seat here for a second. Okay, so we have this quote in the book. We interviewed Lee Cullum. Have any of you heard of her? She's a longtime journalist in Dallas. And she is the niece of the late Robert Cullum, who was kind of King Eric's, partner in kind of opposing the. Thank you, Burke.
Sure.
I did a Dallas Cowboy, and I fumbled the magazine.
Set it down here.
Yes, sir. Yes. So anyway, Lee Cullum, she knew both your dad and John Murkison, his brother. Now, I told you, this blew me away when I started working with you on this book. Clint was very low profile. That was the public perception of him. But John Murkison, I was stunned to learn, was a 50-50 partner. Like he owned an equal amount of the Cowboys the whole time, or most of the time his brother owned the team. But anyway, this was Lee's point was she seemed to think that your dad might have gotten his way had he involved John as appointed John to be the negotiator, because John was buddies with all these people like Eric Johnson. He was on the board of the art museum and the museums and the other museums and so forth. Your dad, I guess, was not. This was her quote. John had a lovely way about him. Everybody loved John. Clint was very introverted, not a people person, whereas Uncle Bob Cullum was the quintessential people person. Eric Johnson was very much admired, and I always found him to be warm and wonderful. Is she onto something? Should John have been the negotiator?
And we heard this elsewhere, not about my Uncle John as serving in as an intermediary, but these are two strong-willed people, and when they got together, and it was not pretty, and there was not a lot of respect going either way. And I think we've heard this elsewhere with Vince Carosa, for example, who was a developer that worked with the Murkison family, knew Dad. I think I mentioned him a minute ago, but he knew Dad, and Vince felt like it may, I'm not sure about John, but somebody that was mutually respected by both men, had there been that individual around, this person around to step in and kind of negotiate this thing, they might have gone somewhere. But I'm not. It's just hard to say. I mean, they were. I think Eric Johnson was very, very fixed in his opinion that they didn't need a stadium in downtown Dallas. It was not appropriate that one be placed there. I kind of doubt that he would have ever backed down, but it's uncertain.
Right, and the thing is, okay, this is a big part of our book, the quest to build this thing downtown. In 2013, the Dallas Morning News hosted a big symposium. It was on the 50th anniversary of the assassination. And there were many distinguished people there. The late, great newsman Jim Lehrer was there. The Pulitzer Prize-winning author Lawrence Wright, who was a high school student at Woodrow Wilson when the assassination occurred, and many other movers and shakers. And they kind of surprised me that day. We weren't talking about the stadium specifically, but somebody brought up Eric Johnson's accomplishments, the new DFW Airport, the new City Hall, the Central Library, all this stuff, the goals for Dallas. And one woman, I think it was Gail Thomas, who spoke up, she said, yeah, but I feel like he was kind of tone deaf in terms of doing something with downtown. And she did not bring up the stadium, but she said, I think he was kind of tone deaf in failing to do something. She said, the truth is, from 1963 until today, that year being 2013, she said, downtown Dallas has been a ghost town. And I don't disagree with that. I agree with that. And I think a stadium would have been a really wonderful, I think it would have added to Eric Johnson's legacy. I think it would have accompanied the new library, the new City Hall, the new airport, all these things. I think it's just a shame that they couldn't work it out. This is because, as you know, the Dallas Cowboys have not once ever played a game in downtown Dallas. Don't you find that a little bizarre? They played in Fair Park. They last played a game in the city of Dallas in 1971. Maybe he never realized that he was doing this, but by doing what he did, and this is my opinion, I'm a native of Dallas, I get to have an opinion on this. By doing what he did, I think Eric Johnson affected enormously the future of professional sports in downtown Dallas. We have two major league teams that play downtown, the Dallas Mavericks and the Dallas Stars hockey team. And were it not for Ron Kirk, who was the mayor at the time, he's the one who pushed through the American Airlines Center. He got it on the ballot. Voters approved it overwhelmingly. The debt on it was paid off early. Otherwise, those two teams would be in Arlington. You wouldn't have any major league teams in Dallas, right? And I'm sorry, Eric Johnson was an architect for many of the things that happened in Dallas that people think are wonderful, but he was also the architect of professional sports not really having much of a presence in downtown Dallas. And I've been to a lot of NFL cities. My favorite with what they've done downtown is Minneapolis. They have this gorgeous stadium for the Vikings that was designed by the Dallas architectural firm HKS, which also did AT&T Stadium and many others. And they have the great Guthrie Theater downtown. Downtown there is alive. I mean, they have the basketball arena. They have the baseball stadium, which is new. It's so much different from downtown Dallas. So, yes, I think Petula Clark was right, but Eric didn't listen to that song apparently. Do you want to go to the next slide? Okay. I mean, this is kind of my own indulgence here. As I told you, I really am fascinated by the history and sociology that we have in Hole in the Roof. There was a previous example, a much sadder example, of a non-elected official having full autocratic control over what happened to the buildings in New York City. And speaking of books, the biography of Robert Moses was written by the great Robert Caro, who later wrote the biographical series on Lyndon Johnson, each volume of which you can find in Tom Keener's library, the Allen Public Library. Robert Moses was not the mayor of New York. He was a commissioner. I'm not sure if he was elected or not. I think he was probably appointed. But he had full control over what buildings were built and where they were built. And of course, the sad ending to this story is the Dodgers owner, who ultimately was blamed for moving the Dodgers from Brooklyn to Los Angeles, he had a plan for a brand new stadium, and it wasn't going to take a penny of taxpayer money, which, by the way, Clint Murchison never took a penny of taxpayer money the whole time he had Texas Stadium. Just think about that, right? It's very rare, as we'll show you in a minute. But Robert Moses said, no, if you want a stadium, you can move to Queens. Well, we'd be the Queens Dodgers then. We want to be the Brooklyn Dodgers. We have a great place. And it was no, 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 no. He was even more intransigent, possibly, than Eric Johnson was with Clint. And finally, one day, the phone rang in O'Malley's office, and it was people from LA. And they said, why don't you move the team out here? I think this is a good time to sneak this in. These people may be shocked to learn this, but your father considered moving the Cowboys, a la Walter O'Malley. He considered moving them somewhere else. Tell them about that.
Well, he while he was working with, kind of negotiating with Eric Johnson in Dallas, he wanted to keep, he just wouldn't give up on that. So he kept that hope up. But while he also knew that he needed to find a second location to work on, and he wasn't going to use that as a stalking horse, but it was more, he was not going to go back, and he would have to go back to play during the interim, but he was not going to continue to play at the Cotton Bowl after he'd been treated the way he was treated, and given the basic state of affairs at the Cotton Bowl and its condition. He was never going to play there, have the team play there on long term. And so he through a friend, was introduced to the city of Irving. And so go on with your question then.
Well, what was the city he thought about moving them to?
Oh yeah, well, so getting there, it was a long process to finally make a deal with Irving, and it's a fascinating story, and the whole that's fascinating. But as he began these discussions, he could not get any kind of cooperation from Irving either. They had a mayor that had been, I guess he'd been there for 5 terms. He was real entrenched, and he wouldn't even talk to Dad. And so Dad ended up, through a friend, Max Thomas, who lived in Dallas but had born and raised in Irving. Dad decided to go to the back door, and ended up approaching a young city councilman by the name of Bob Power, who then, the story goes on, but became mayor and opened the door for Dad, for Dad and for his dreams to build a stadium. But in that period of time, Dad became more and more frustrated. And at one time, in one of his meetings with Bob and some other Irving people, he says, "I don't know what to do. I can't get anything going here. I may have to move him to Oklahoma City." And it was just kind of laughable. I mean, it was, considering everything, but he had business friends up there, and he was at a loss. He also looked at Arlington, at the old Turnpike Stadium there, where the minor league Texas team had played, or Dallas team had played, and he felt at the time, of course, he basically said, "I can't ask my fans to drive all the way to Arlington." So that was out. He was just running out of alternatives, and he became incredibly frustrated. And I think that statement about Oklahoma City was more just pure frustration than a real thinking.
Okay. Christmas Eve, 1967. Your dad left everybody a Christmas present. He announced that he was leaving behind his dream of putting the stadium in downtown Dallas. He was giving up on his own version of Robert Moses and moving to Irving, which was not Los Angeles or Brooklyn or Oklahoma City. Irving was 1 mile from the Dallas city limit sign. But so that was the beginning of his experience.
Right. It was interesting because he thought about, I mean, he kind of led the charge for the city of Irving. And those people, it was a small city. The people he was dealing with were, perfectly nice. They were a little unsophisticated and whatnot. And so he had to do everything for these people. And one of the things that was important was the location. And it was actually his friend Max Thomas, stood up again, and he was able to find a piece of property on which to locate the stadium. And he actually had Charles, not Pister, but Gene Cronin, who was a broker, and they were able to block up, consolidate 85 acres made up of like almost 20 different landowners there where it's now located. And it was at the confluence of 114, 183, and Loop 12. And, 114 didn't even exist at the time, but they knew it was in the planning stages. And this was truly a remarkable location. And he knew it was. And it was at less than a mile. It was just a mile west of Dallas. And in his mind, while he would prefer to have gone to have located, say, to downtown, he viewed this as actually a superior location for the ticket buyers in terms of where they were coming from Dallas and things.
Hey, one thing I think we should bring up is, as you know, they have one marquee game a year at the Cotton Bowl. That's the Texas OU game. And once again, recently, the city threw another $150 million of tax local money at another renovation of the Cotton Bowl. And it looks great. It looks absolutely great. But I remind you, it's one marquee game a year. Now, I'm kind of happy they did it because I had so many happy memories there. I certainly wouldn't want to see the Cotton Bowl torn down. But the city of Dallas needs so many things, and yet they always seem to find money, millions of dollars, to renovate the Cotton Bowl every few years to keep Texas and Oklahoma from playing that game in Austin or Norman, right? And so, it's that is also kind of an interesting thing. But as I said in the last paragraph here, but what Clint never could have imagined is that 57 years later, the Cowboys still don't play their home games in Dallas. I find that kind of weird.
What's also incredible is that when he made that announcement, it was as though the people in Dallas or the leaders, the mayor and Robert Cullum, the head of Fair Park, and they refused to listen. He said, this is my decision. But what they felt, the mayor and Johnson and et al. Felt like that they could defeat Dad by defeating his whole financing plan, which is based on the sale of these seed option bonds. Mm-hmm. And they had the what was the fundraiser, the campaign that the mayor had held. It was a Goals for Dallas campaign. Yeah. And they actually dedicated $13 million, which has ended up being about half the cost of what Texas Stadium costs, but half the cost to $3 million to renovating the Cotton Bowl, number one. And they put in seating that had backs on it. They were kind of it was.
They replaced those splintery wooden benches with
metal
folding chairs.
Aluminum seating that were colored silver and blue. Yeah. They were painted silver and blue. And they had that, and so they spent about, which were Cowboy colors, and they spent about $3 million on that, and then they took another $10 million to expand the parking grounds at the Cotton Bowl. So through
the power of eminent domain, just
right,
getting rid of those people.
And I think what they thought that they could show that the Cotton Bowl truly was had potential as a site, and they thought that they would defeat Dallas in terms of selling Dad rather in terms of selling these bonds, seed option bonds to buyers, which was a novel new thing. That there was a lot of resistance to that, and so it was a delicate time. But they were very calculating, and they're willing to throw a lot of money at it to defeat Dad and his whole plan.
This is an excellent point that Burke brings up, because now every 3 to 5 years, if Texas or Oklahoma feels like, well, we'd like a little bit nicer Cotton Bowl, so they'll throw in some more money at it. None of that was promised to Clint. Not even a modest renovation was promised to him. But evicting all of these homeowners and tenants from this, it wasn't a predominantly black neighborhood near the Cotton Bowl. It was entirely black. And evicting all of those families, forcing them to go somewhere else, just so you can have parking for what? For a team that's going to leave and go play in Irving? The only tenants left in the Cotton Bowl were SMU played their home games there. They drew very modest crowds. And then there was, of course, the Texas OU game during the fair and the annual Cotton Bowl game. But there, it wasn't really used a lot. And the main tenant was going to be going to another city. So it was a day late and a dollar short. Can you go to the next slide? Okay. Now, as a journalist, this is one thing that I loved learning about Clint Jr. and Texas Stadium. All the years they were there, not one penny of taxpayer money, not one. That is so rare today. And that stadium was there for 37 years. Not only did taxpayers ever have to pay for the cost of it, but the Cowboys provided police and fire protection. Can you tell them the story though on
What's that?
The payments that your dad started making that Jerry Jones was late on? Can you tell them that story?
Oh, well, I'm not sure if he was just slow pay kind of.
He would pay it. It wasn't a rent, but it was some kind of a lease payment, right?
Yeah, they had a lease with the city of Irving, and oftentimes there were definitions of revenues and whatnot that needed to be paid, and I don't know, just a way to over time. We're kind of getting ahead of ourselves, but it's fine. But over time, in terms of the relationship with Jones, once finally there was between Jones and Dad, there was Bum Bright. That's another story altogether. But eventually. Jones bought the Cowboys as well as the management company, Texas Stadium Corp., which is the management company of the city. City of Irving always owned the stadium and the real estate. That's another story too. But in Jones's case, it became kind of like the tail wagging the dog a little bit, and it was a very uncomfortable relationship because Jones was always pushing these people. The city officials and whatnot, and slow pay was one of them. But another big issue was that one of the things that Bum Bright tried to interest Jones as far as another secondary source of income was to begin selling beer on the concourse. Irving was a very traditional conservative city, and they would not listen to, even though people were bringing all sorts of beer and liquor with them into the stadium, they didn't want it sold on the concourse through the vendors and stuff. It was kind of silly, but in hindsight, but Jones, Bum Bright kind of opened up this as a possibility, another revenue, and they sold a ton of beer once it was approved. But Jones, he went after them, and it turned into just a real battle, and actually it just forced him, because of legal reasons, forced Irving to sell. And finally, about 2 years after he bought the team, he bought it in 89, I think.
89, right.
He was able to successfully get beer sold, and it was a big breakthrough. But he was just, he when he wanted something, he would not stop. And he was just very, I think the relationship with the city of Irving just became very tenuous at best, I think.
Okay, your dad was told by the people in Irving that he would not be receiving any tax money, and he never took any tax money. So the key to Texas Stadium was the financing method, and which I thought was great because it meant the users of the stadium would be financing the stadium. Tell them how that came about.
Yeah, it was interesting because so Dad eventually, that on the 24th was up to another slides of 67, he made the decision he was going to focus on Irving solely, but Irving, then they became, just as Dallas had been difficult to deal with, Irving suddenly became difficult to deal with for Dallas because they knew there was Irving, but Dad had nowhere else to turn, and they well knew that, and they took advantage of that position. And one of the things they required, Dad had blocked up and consolidated that 85 acres and actually bought it he put over $3 million buying it. And his idea was to keep that and finance the stadium privately using the land as collateral and other ways to, guarantees and whatnot to build the stadium. And so he was going to do it and end up owning it himself. Well, Irving decided, well, we want to own it. And so their thing, there was like, Dad had bought this and consolidated and he paid little over $3 million, but in consolidating, he had enhanced the value of the property substantially. And they say, well, we'll give you what you put into it, but we want to own it and we want to own the stadium, but we don't want to put any municipal dollars in this. We don't want to put any tax-based dollars in this thing because we're a small community. We're just not going to do it. And so it left Dad with the job of developing a financing system that was novel at the time, and he was helped out by Kay Bailey Hutchinson, Ray Hutchinson, who was a wife of Kay Bailey, or husband rather, and he was a young lawyer at the time, but he became a municipal finance guru and pretty much financed every substantial auditorium or stadium and whatnot in Dallas. He's behind his fingerprints and all that. And so they went to work and they developed a seat option bond, which included a bond. And so and what they did is restricted season ticket sales to only people that would buy these bonds. And they attached a seat option to it. So when you bought a bond, you also got season tickets. And they were face value was $300 and they were discounted to $250. And so if you put for what it was for one bond was $250 for like.
Yeah, between the outside the 30-yard line.
Outside the 30-yard line, it would be.
But inside the 30, the better seats, each seat was 1,000.
Yeah, four.
Yeah.
So 4 times 250. Yeah. With a face value of 300. But anyway, it's complicated. But so he had to come up with this whole system and organize it and facilitate it and manage it. And he was doing all this and ultimately, sorry. And then ultimately, that works better, doesn't it? But he was able, as they began to roll out the sales, there was a lot of resistance, and they were ultimately they were able to raise their first $5 million, or 10 million. Let's see, $10 million. City of Irving was in these seat option bond sales, and Dad, to keep the momentum going, bought the same amount himself. But the Cowboys did through the Cowboys. They bought the same amount themselves. So they built the shell with the first 20 million or so, and then it wasn't that much. It was, anyway.
But your dad ended up paying $21 million out of his own pocket toward
he ended up sinking $21 million. And this today, things have changed, but back then, that was in 1970 or so. That was just a hell of a lot of money. And so he was totally totally convinced and just involved and dedicated to getting the job done and stuff. It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, and one of the key points we make is, before Texas Stadium was built, most of the NFL stadiums were baseball stadiums that they shared with baseball teams, or they were very old stadiums. I was surprised that in '66, their first winning season, the Cotton Bowl, was one of the newer NFL stadiums, and it was built in 1930. The Philadelphia Eagles Stadium, Franklin Field, was built in the 1800s, not that long after the Civil War, right? And the thing that Texas Stadium did is it really improved stadiums aesthetically. It gave a new aesthetic model, but mainly it was an economic model. It gave owners, television money was really on the rise. But one of the things I learned about Clint, very visionary on his part, he knew that television revenue would peter out at some point, and owners were going to need other sources of revenue, and it would have to come from the stadium. Up to then, stadiums were city-owned rental facilities. And why would they need new sources of revenue? Well, you may have heard that Dak Prescott makes more money than most of us, right? That avalanche was on its way. He knew that. And in fact, the next owner, Bum Bright, bless his heart, had a really rough time with player unrest, and there was a big strike in '87 that kind of paved the way to free agency and big salaries. But one final point about the stadium. Some people felt that luxury suites, Clint did not invent these, but he put them to good use in Texas Stadium, that they added a level of stratification. But after I did my research, I changed my mind about this because they only accounted for, a third of the cost? They ended up financing a third of
there was initially the Circle Suites. There were two levels of these Circle Suites, and they call them Circle Suites. There were two levels of them. There were a total of 178, and they sold at $50,000. You bought $50,000 worth of bonds,
right,
or to secure them, and if you do the math, they basically raised about a third of the cost of the stadium itself through the sales suites. And those suites only said, what did we figure out?
We added it up, and it was a total of about 2,000 seats in the suites, but it was a 65,000 seat stadium. So 63,000 seats were not suites. So I don't think that really equates to stratification.
I think there were a lot of things about the Cotton Bowl that Clint Jr. did not like. He wanted to have a different experience for his fans and for the future of the team. But one of the things, he liked football-only stadiums, which the Cotton Bowl was. And one of the things that was bizarre to me in doing some of the research on this book is in '66, when the Cowboys have their first winning season, most of the teams in the NFL shared a stadium with a baseball team. And, Wrigley Field in Chicago, Tiger Stadium in Detroit. And, you would have to configure the baseball field in a very odd way to put the gridiron on there. It looked so bizarre. And Clint didn't want that. He wanted to get away from that completely. And the other thing that was weird was I took a really hard look at all the stadiums in '66 when the Cowboys had their first winning season. And the Cotton Bowl, believe it or not, was one of the newer stadiums, and it was built in 1930, right? The Philadelphia Eagles Stadium, Franklin Field, was built in the 1800s. And then many of the other teams, shared with the baseball team. And but the Cotton Bowl had good sight lines, mainly because it was a football-only stadium. It
wasn't perfect, though, at the same time.
No, but I covered...
One thing that he reacted to were sight lines were good. It was a football only, which is important to him. But one of the things he improved on at Texas Stadium was that the seats on the first few rows were far too low. You get down on the first row and you'd be at ground level. You couldn't look over the people on the bench when they were playing and stuff. It was kind of a joke. But when he built Texas Stadium, he had the first row elevated. I don't know if anybody remembers, but and then it became more and more elevated.
That was a good idea.
As it went around towards the end zone. So continue to have better sight lines than you would have otherwise. He's very incredibly conscious of the spectator experience, and he tried to build all that in the Texas Stadium.
Okay, this really makes me angry as an old reporter. These are the new stadiums being proposed right now in the National Football League. By the way, I researched this before I came. The NFL has 32 owners. 30 of the 32 are certified billionaires. Believe it or not, Jerry Jones is not the richest owner. He comes in at number 6 or number 7. The richest owner right now, and their new owners, are the owners of the Denver Broncos. The primary owner of the Broncos, his wealth comes from being a member of the Walton or the Walmart family, but he recently announced that he's at the bottom there. They're going to build an incredible new dome stadium in Denver, which I'm sure will have Super Bowls every 3 or 4 years. And they promise, they vow, they swear they will never take a penny of taxpayer money. But look at the others. Cleveland, $600 million of taxpayer money. Jacksonville, $775 million. Buffalo is my favorite. He's building a $1 billion stadium in Buffalo. It's a new stadium, but it's another outdoor stadium in Buffalo, New York. So the taxpayers are going to pay $850 million for him to have a new stadium. Washington, they're at $1 billion. Chicago, 1.58. Kansas City, 1.5. Tennessee, I guess, comes in the highest. They're going to take $2.3 billion from taxpayers.
So these are all new stadiums, right?
To build their new
stadiums.
stadiums. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's go to the next one. We're moving right through it. Oh, the Ice Bowl. This is very painful. You can play the video now. I took this video at Love Field, like on the day that the Cowboy Charter flew to Green Bay for the Ice Bowl game, and I think you will agree, based on the quality of this video, that I missed my mark. I could have been the next Steven Spielberg, right? I mean, this is just riveting cinema, right? And so there's the flight. Remember when Braniff Airlines was actually a thing? So that was the charter. Maybe that's why they didn't win. And so it goes to Green Bay to play in the ill-fated Ice Bowl game, which was December 31st, 1967. They lost 2 games to the Packers in 67, one on the first day of 67, one on the last day of 67. Okay, you can go to the next one, even though I know the film is riveting. And of course, I worked in my own personal criticism of Tom Landry there. I did have issues with him as a coach. I'm sorry. I'm a former sports writer. I feel that game should have been won and could have been won had he not gone to his prevent defense in the closing seconds. Same thing with the 81 game against the San Francisco 49ers. And now I've alienated this crowd because I think they're all Landry lovers.
Well, there's players, but the players themselves used to say about what do they call it,
prevent defense.
They'd say, it's prevent defense because it keeps us from winning.
Yeah. In fact, I told my brother, I said, he goes into the prevent defense in the waning moments of the Ice Bowl game. His regular defense is playing lights out, so we lose. Green Bay drives the length of a frozen field to win in the closing seconds. And then in 81, again, we got a lead on the 49ers. The defense is playing great. He goes to the prevent defense. San Francisco goes all the way down the field. It ends with the catch. That was a very painful loss. Okay, you can go to the next one. Okay, this is a great shot. This is an Associated Press photo. A great Cowboy running back, Dwayne Thomas. He would play a key role, and this is the first game at Texas Stadium. He's walking onto the field for the first time. Okay, go to the next slide. So this is Burt Murkison's favorite Texas Stadium moment, Thanksgiving Day. Why don't you set it up? Why did this backup quarterback come in the game?
There's a man named they called him the Mad Bomber, Clint Longley. He wasn't even he went to Abilene Christian and was actually drafted by Cincinnati and traded for one of the Cowboys beginning that season. And that was but Derek, at the beginning of that season, Roger Staubach and Craig Morton were still on the team, and Craig got tired of sitting on the bench watching Rodgers, and he demanded to be traded, and so they were left. That season, they just went with 2 quarterbacks, which is kind of scary. And they had Roger and Clint Longleat, who they called the Mad Bomber because apparently during training camp he had one pass that like careened off the coach's tower off the practice field. It was just like some bizarre pass that went, and he earned him that nickname. And during the game going into, it was a George Allen coached team, Washington Redskin team, and this was the height of our rivalry with them, and they just hated each other. And one of the things, they had some players, old veterans, and one of them was Darren Talbert, who was a UT grad, and was he and George just kind of liked each other, and they would plot what they would do to the Cowboys on a game by game basis. And this one was they were going to knock Roger Staubach out of the game, and then just go on and win. And we weren't. I don't know. I think they were actually I think they went to the Super Bowl in '73, didn't they? Washington, I think. But anyway, they were quite a good team, and they were beating us at halftime going into the third quarter, 16-3. And Roger was having a really difficult day, and sure enough, he tried to run or scramble one time, and somebody hit him and knocked him out of the game.
Darren Talbot.
Somebody just knocked him out of the game, and so who was left but the Mad Bomber?
Okay, this is a personal story. On December 28th, 1975, we're getting close to the 50th anniversary. I was living in Anchorage, Alaska, where I had become the sports editor of the Anchorage Times. My slogan was, I am editor of the most outstanding section of the largest newspaper in the largest city, in the largest state of the most powerful nation of the world. So anyway, this is where I lived on the day of the Alaska Art Tile Shop. I lived in one of those places up above. It was so bad, my friends nicknamed it Swamp 2 because I had lived at a worse place earlier called Swamp 1. And so Anchorage at that time was 4 hours behind Central Time. So kickoff in Minneapolis was 7:30 a.m. And I invited my best friend over, who happened to be a fan of the Philadelphia Eagles. He, of course, cheered against the Cowboys the entire game. He was quite smug, quite full of himself until the closing minutes of the game. So, I told this story to a guy that I like to call a friend. I know he's a friend of Burke's too. And I asked him if he would weigh in about this moment I had in Anchorage watching this game with this Eagles fan. And, he agreed, and he really came through. So can you play that video for me?
Had I been in Anchorage in 1975, I too would have enjoyed watching me throw the Hail Mary pass that defeated the Minnesota Vikings in the NFL playoffs 17-14. And Drew Pearson didn't push off. Even if I've had to watch this thing on a crummy 8-inch black and white TV in Granbury's Swamp 2 apartment. Newsbomb, you should have known better.
Okay, before you go on to the next one, the next one is our final slide. I know you're thrilled about that. So anyway, the final slide is I asked my youngest son to kind of give you the goodbye video, the kiss on the cheek for coming tonight, and also to share with you his own frustrations about the current Dallas Cowboys. By the way, all these highlights are 50 years old, as you may have noticed, right? So can you click it to the next one? And this is, we got to do Bum and Jerry first. Okay, so Bum buys the team, best owner in Cowboy history. I know you'll agree.
Oh my gosh, Bum Bright was a different kind of person. He bought the team at a tough time. And his priorities were a little off. He viewed it more of investment. I think owners of these franchises, they need to be really passionate. And he was anything but that. And in fact, one of his, he came out of the banking community, Bum did. He was the largest single shareholder of Republic National Bank, back in that time and whatnot, before the Great Texas Recession. And one of the bankers that worked with him described me as the person least likely to own the Cowboys. And so it was, he had the wealth and whatnot, but he didn't have the mindset. He had never actually even attended a Cowboy game, I think, before buying the team. He's a big Aggie fan. he, you know, and I guess he bled what burgundy, I guess, and in fact it affected his relationship with Tom Landry, who was a UT guy, and so it was just a very difficult time, and he was a difficult man, and only on the team for like 5 years. They just kind of hit the wall, and it was just a very difficult time for them.
Okay, go to the next one. They'll all recognize this person. There you go. They didn't cheer. They didn't stand up. Yeah. Okay, go to the finale slide. Here you go. Come on, Josh. Tell us.
Hi there. My name is Joshua Quitman Granberry. I am a fan of the Dallas Cowboys, although sometimes I wonder why. I'm 29 years old, which means that when the Cowboys last played in a Super Bowl on January 28th, 1996, I was literally in utero. My dad was at the game, as was my oldest brother Ted, who at the time was 10 years old. Ted recently turned 40. Not long ago, I too became a father. Among my many hopes for my daughter is that she doesn't have to wait until she's 30 for the Cowboys to win their next Super Bowl. So please, team, can you do that for me? In the meantime, I want to thank you for coming out to see Mr. Murkison and my dad. Hope you have a great year and that it ends for you and for me with the Cowboys having a chance at least to win their 6th Super Bowl.
And there you have it.
Okay.
So do we want to do Q&A? Does anybody have any questions?
Questions, comments, protests, but the first one I'm going to ask because he worked for the city of Allen for 23 years. Tell us about the famous play of Tony Hill.
Tony Hill. Oh, he worked for the city of Allen, right? Yeah. Everybody probably remembers the great come from behind victory in 1979 when they were playing Washington again, and Dallas came from behind, and Roger Staubach threw kind of a last-minute pass to Tony Hill, and they won that game and ended up that year in the Super Bowl, I believe, against Pittsburgh.
And we also knocked in that winning that game knocked Washington out of the playoffs also.
Oh yeah, that's right. Well, that's always good.
So it was a big play.
Yeah. Anybody else? Anybody have any
Questions,
questions?
comments, protests?
Yes. Go ahead. Okay.
Mr. Murkison, where did your dad make his money to be in the position to be able to acquire the Cowboys and finance the stadium? And then where did his dad make the money because he came from a wealthy family?
Yeah. Well, my father, he was, his father was, my grandfather was an incredible entrepreneur and businessman and focused on oil and gas, and most specifically on oil and gas transmission pipelines and whatnot. And it's pretty, I mean, he had a spectacular career, and he brought his sons, he had two sons, adult sons that he brought into the business, and they formed this Murkison Brothers, a partnership, and he helped kind of initially show them along the way, and then illness and whatnot, he had to step back, but he got him up and going and started. So really, I mean, somebody at one time asked Dad what the secret of the success was, and he said, like, having a wealthy father. And he was kind of a jokester himself, but that was the case, and they were born into wealth and had great instincts, and were taught great instincts as far as business is concerned themselves from their father.
But somebody who did shut his son down in trying to buy an NFL team, and this is a bit of a parallel to the current Cowboy owner, Jerry Jones. The Cowboys were not the first team that he wanted to own. He wanted to buy the San Diego Chargers when he was in his 20s, and his father said, no, you're not about to do that, and managed to prevent his son or stop his son from buying into the NFL at a very young age, when he really didn't have the money even then to buy an NFL franchise. But I think this meant a lot to Clint Jr., and he went through I mean, he went through an incredible endurance test to try to get a franchise for Dallas. And then another Texas oil man, his son, lo and behold, ends up as a competitor in 1960. You know, they both began playing in the Cotton Bowl, the Texans and the Cowboys. So there was that issue as well. And so he overcame a lot to launch the franchise, and then certainly to have it be as incredibly successful as it was through the years.
And initially lost a lot of money also, I might add. So I'm sure, but the results speak for themselves. It's spectacular over time.
I'm going to ask 2 questions, unless there's other in the audience.
You mentioned about I guess I wasn't sure the 2 people that really clashed. Was that your dad and your uncle?
What was that? No, that was Eric Johnson. And
Okay,
my father.
okay.
Eric Johnson, my father. No, they were my uncle and dad had a partnership, and they had different personalities and whatnot. And actually, our uncle died prematurely and whatnot. But they didn't. He was in the process of asking to liquidate the partnership because of just issues that came up. But they were generally civil with each other and stuff.
Questions, comments?
By the way, we have books. If anybody would like to come up and buy a book, we'll be happy to
get
sign
a
one.
tell
We'll be happy
me-
to sign it for you.
There's a question back
They get
there.
a custom signature tonight. Yes, sir.
Oh, that's Miguel. Hi.
Hey, how's it going?
Thanks for
Hey,
coming
so,
out.
Actually, I grew up in Allen since '89, so I kind of grew up watching the Cowboys winning 3 Super Bowls growing up in high school. So that was fun to watch.
Yeah.
But one of the things maybe I came in a little late, but my question is, where were the Cowboys before they came to Dallas?
Oh no, they were.
They were
was
an
a start of-
expansion team.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
Say that again.
They started in Dallas. They were an expansion team.
Okay. All right.
Yes, it's like a startup franchise. That's one of the things that made it kind of added to the whole risk profile. It was a very challenging environment, particularly when you were, having a rival team from a rival league, the Texans. They were playing on alternate weekends at the Cotton Bowl, and
Okay.
it's just a tough deal.
Okay. And was the Oilers around
Yeah, they started the same year.
the same year? Okay.
Yeah. That's when the AFL started up, and Lamar Hunt, the founder of the Texans, but also was responsible for founding the entire league. He was an impressive man.
To give a plug to the book, every page there's a problem that Mr. Murkison had to confront. And then as soon as it reminded me of those games where something pops up and then you hit it and something else pops up over here. It seemed like every page,
Smack-a-mole.
every page was full of a problem, and then Clint Jr. solved it, and then another problem surfaced. And it's just watching how a human being solves problems. This should be a required reading for every business student, every management student in the United States. Last question I'll ask.
Never give up.
That was the theme of the book. And I got to ask the question, but on why in the world, when Jerry Jones and Jimmy Johnson were college chums, Jimmy Johnson took the team to the Super Bowl. And what kind of gratitude does he get? He gets fired. Tell us about that.
Why don't you do that?
Okay, so there were problems in that relationship before the divorce actually happened. There were, if you will, there were marital problems before that happened. So they win their second consecutive Super Bowl. That's so hard to do nowadays. They win back-to-back Super Bowls, right? Both against Buffalo. And they had this NFL meeting in Florida where all strange things happen. And so it's at a hotel, And Jimmy is with some former coaches, I think some people who had worked for the Cowboys, and they're with their wives. And Jerry walks up and very innocently wants to propose a toast, to the Cowboys' successes. And in my opinion, they did a bad thing. They cold-shouldered him. They just completely rejected him, maybe made him feel like crap. But the problems with Jimmy and Jerry had gone on for a long time before that. There were many cracks in the relationship. So Jerry got really angry, and I think he was probably inebriated as well. And he he runs into these sports writers, and he makes the comment that 500 people could coach the Cowboys, and they would do just as good as Jimmy. And I think he's had 500 coaches since Jimmy, but they haven't quite done as well as Jimmy. And in my own opinion, I wish somebody had been able to get him to calm down and say to him, you know what, you guys do need to separate. But you want to win 3 in a row. We know why don't you calmly get together and say, look, this partnership, the days of this partnership are numbered, but let's try to win 3 in a row. And then you help me find your successor. There would have been a rational way to end this marriage without it just completely blowing up. So it's really unfortunate that it blew up the way that it did. But when I was at the Morning News, I wrote a lot of obituaries, and you do these things well in advance. And if I was not assigned to write the advance obituary on Jerry, but I have a pretty good idea what it would say. This man who, a self-made billionaire who ended up owning the wealthiest franchise in all of sports, anywhere in the world, not just football, but all of sports, but whose inability to win a championship, to repeat as a champion over 30 years, marred his legacy as much as his previous successes enhanced his legacy. That's kind of the whole thing. And I haven't seen all of this Netflix documentary because I just can't make it through it. But I do know both Troy Aikman and Jimmy have said this, that Jerry is guilty of revisionist history in that documentary. And he is. I mean, let's be honest. Jimmy was the best move he made as an executive was hiring Jimmy Johnson and let him build a team that won 3 Super Bowls.
Yeah, I will also say that during those years, particularly early on, it kind of forced the two of them to work independently, because Jerry was trying to figure out, he had debt up to his eyeballs, and he was trying to do what he could to handle the liabilities and get the ship righted and get things running. And he was working hard and just focused entirely on the business end. And he did, he didn't take any prisoners, and he did a great job turning that franchise around. It was really in the dumps, but it kept him focused on that and let Johnson just do his job, coach. So you had that separation of power, which was really important, and they both did a great job. But then I think they started winning Super Bowls, and they got the thing stabilized. I think Jerry got focused on, I want more of the attention for myself as they began to win those Super Bowls, and he began to kind of like encroach on in ways on and limiting Johnson's independence and stuff, and it's got real ugly real fast.
One last question. Anybody?
Here we go.
Sir.
Oh, we got 2 more. Here we go.
2 more.
What was the team? I think you said in '52 it was original Dallas Texans.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What
but they
was
were
that?
not affiliated with the team that became the Kansas City Chiefs. They had the same name, but they were 2 totally different
It's
franchises.
a separate thing.
Yeah.
They just recycle the name.
I know this may be unrelated, but what is the logic of Jerry paying Dak practically the same salary as a proven hero, Patrick Mahomes?
Actually, okay, this is a good question, and I'll tell you why. I just did some research on that. I just looked this up. It's about, he's actually asking about why does Dak, either have the same salary, or Dak has a much better salary than Patrick Mahomes. And this is why this is a great question. This is one of the biggest mistakes, in my sports writer opinion, that Jerry can be faulted as a team executive. He waits too long to sign these guys. He should be signing them at the earliest possible opportunity. That way, the check he writes would be much smaller. The Kansas City Chiefs, who have an incredible general manager, who, by the way, is not a member of the Hunt family, they hire a general manager and a coach. This general manager has been brilliant. And the main way he has been brilliant is that he signs the star players, the Patrick Mahomes, the Kelseys. He gets them at the earliest window of opportunity. As a result of the highest paid quarterbacks in the NFL, I looked this up 2 days ago. Do you know where Patrick Mahomes rates on the highest paid NFL quarterbacks? He is the 15th highest paid quarterback, because they signed him to a long-term deal at the earliest possible opportunity. Jerry waits until past the last opportunity. He waits until it's ridiculous. This is partly why he had to get rid of Micah, because he's paid so much money to a handful of players, and he didn't really have any money left. I mean, he really needed to trade Parsons, A, because he waited way too long to sign him to a long-term deal, and then B, he needed desperately to free up cap space. And he may be reminded on Sunday when Micah Parsons comes to the stadium.
I also feel like he's too emotional, and he gets in situations that, he gets close to these players and whatnot. You've mentioned that, I think, before. He gets close to these players, and he pays up for them. And what he fails to recognize is these players, they're depreciating assets because they're getting older every day, and some of them don't. Injuries can play a part. It's affected Dak's career and things. And a lot of times you can't always, you got to factor that in. But I mean, it just seems like Jerry gets too emotional about this stuff and ends up making kind of poor decisions.
Michael Granberry, thank you.
Thank you.
Burt Merkerson, thank you. Please describe how Crazy Ray enhanced the ambiance of the Dallas Cowboy experience.
Well, can I take a shot at that one?
I want you to answer that one, yes.
Anyway, I thought the mascots that were developed at and around Texas Stadium, and he started in the Cotton Bowl and went on to Texas Stadium. But I think all these, including Ray, who was just a really hilarious character and stuff, and iconic to say the least. And I thought Dad did a really good job recruiting, authentic people to serve in those roles. And Crazy Ray, I mean, Dad loved him, and I remember he would, back in the 60s when he was started at Cotton Bowl, he'd come over, Dad would periodically have parties and open houses and stuff, not related to the team, just socially. And he'd have Crazy Ray would be around, and all his birthdays, he'd be around doing all the crazy tricks and whatnot. And he was just, but I mean, everything Dad did in that regard were just really authentic and exceptional and different. He followed it up with Tommy Lloyd, the trumpeter, who started at, we have a question in here about the Thanksgiving Day game in 1965, I think.
I think it was 66.
66,
Yeah.
But prior to that game, apparently Dad let it be known they were seeking out somebody to play the trumpet or at least play music for the Star Spangled Banner, and I guess the trumpeter got word of that. Tommy Lloyd did, and came down and did I'm not sure if it was for Dad or somebody of the Cowboys, that he did a tryout, and he played. Actually, he said, Tommy Lloyd said he only went down there because he hoped to they gave him the right to stay for the game. So he was excited about that. He never thought he'd be selected, but he was selected, and he played that evening at the Cotton Bowl and continued to play all the way up until I guess the time they were sold by Bum Bright to Jerry Jones. And then there was also not only him, but also at Texas Stadium, I don't know if people remember this, but there was actually a band in the audience that was led by Bill Lively, who's best known as a fundraiser in Dallas, but he was from SMU, and he was somehow involved with the band and music and the band director. And he recruited their musicians, and they would come out. There'd be a small group of them, like 30 or 40. And I remember every time that there was a big play and the Cowboys did something exceptional, the band would jump up and start singing and playing. And they do Up Against the Wall, Redneck Mother by Jerry Jeff Walker, I guess. And just all
Written
that
by Ray Wiley Hubbard, but recorded by Jerry Jeff.
Okay, yeah. And
as well.
Anyway, I mean, just stuff like that. It made it fun, and things didn't change, and they just kept it really upbeat and whatnot and authentic. So Crazy Ray fit right in there and did a good job.